It wasn't just a fence. It was part of the town's history. Every board, every splinter, every rusty screw there had seen more than half the neighborhood put together. But, of course, that information was irrelevant to her. The woman in House 7, the same one who walks around with a clipboard under her arm as if she were the mayor of the street. The one who uses the acronym HOA as if it were the badge of the Urban Aesthetics Police. She showed up for the first time with a cross look on her face and a frustrated architect's ruler. She measured the gate. She made notes. She said she was doing a survey of elements that were out of keeping with the visual standardization of the neighborhood. I thought it was just the talk of bored people with too much time and not enough common sense. But this woman wasn't just talking. She was already planning. My fence was old, yes, but it was an honorable old one. Dark wood with wrought iron details at the top and a hand-carved coat of arms, the symbol of one of the first families to settle in the area at the end of the 19th century. It wasn't just decoration. It was a living document. And it was registered, officially, in the city's Architectural and Cultural Heritage Book. But that part she ignored, or pretended not to know. A gray Tuesday, light rain, and the sound I never wanted to hear. Wood breaking. It wasn't wind. It wasn't a bug. It was the sound of destruction. When I went out to look, a small truck was stopped in front of my house. 3 men in orange overalls had already torn down the first module of the fence. 2 stakes in the ground, the earth turned over, and the coat of arms thrown onto the lawn like a piece of rubble. I rushed down. My heart was in my throat. "Who authorized this?" One of the guys looked a little blank and pointed to the white car parked across the street. She was there, inside, glass half down, sunglasses, red lipstick, and a clipboard on her lap. The woman got out calmly, like someone presenting a project at a science fair. She spoke as if she were reading a medicine leaflet. "We are standardizing the facade as approved at the HOA meeting. Your fence is outside the Uniform Design Guidelines. Removal has been requested." He didn't ask. No warning. He simply told me to do it. I didn't reply at the time. Not for lack of words, but too many. So much was stuck in my throat that, if I spoke, foam would come out. I went back inside, got the property's paperwork, called my lawyer, and in less than 2 hours I had a copy of the fence's original certification, a historic landmark recognized by the City Council since 1978, listed as a cultural preservation structure. But the damage had already been done. When I got back, 3 more modules had fallen to the ground. The wood, which had withstood rain, sun, floods, and even a hurricane, was in pieces, thrown away like common garbage. The coat of arms? Crumpled. The carved iron? Bent. The neighborhood group began to bubble over. One of the neighbors, who knew the history of the house, sent a message to the group. "Guys, you know that the fence of House 23 is listed, right? That's a crime." She replied with her usual irritating calm, "The HOA is just applying standards for visual harmony. We weren't aware of any specific documentation." They didn't, with the preservation signs nailed to the fence, with the notices I had already sent out at 2 meetings, with the notices that were even pasted on the town hall's website. The silence in the street turned to tension. It was the kind of thing that nobody wanted to get involved in, because there, when you confront the HOA, you become the target. But when the HOA is run by a woman who thinks that letterhead is worth more than federal law, things go too far. And I let it go. I let her dig, because the lawsuit was already being filed, and what was coming was going to make the fence look like just the shell of the problem. The news spread faster than gossip in a beauty parlor. In less than 24 hours, the image of the demolished fence was already circulating in at least 3 groups of local residents. There was even a local historian who shared the photo with an indignant text. "Architectural ignorance has destroyed yet another piece of our history." And that was the post that put the woman in the firing line. Until then, she was still walking down the street as if nothing had happened. With her heels tapping dry on the sidewalk and her clipboard under her arm, she walked as if she were a liquidator in a bad soap opera. But the pose began to shake on the second day, when the local newspaper showed up on my doorstep with a camera and microphone. The reporter wanted to understand how a listed structure had been demolished without authorization, without consultation, and, worse, by order of the neighborhood association itself. I showed him the documents, a certificate from the town hall, a historic landmark registration, a photo of the coat of arms before it was thrown into the bush. Everything. The reporter just shook his head as he filmed the rubble on the ground. The story aired that same evening with the headline, "Resident has century-old fence demolished due to HOA error. City Hall confirms crime against property." That's it. It became a scandal. From then on, she could no longer pretend that it was just a misunderstanding. The next day, she disappeared. Not a single morning walk, not a single appearance at the community cafe on 4th Street. Her car was parked all day, and her house was closed off, as if the insulation were a shield. But people don't forgive. One neighbor stuck a printed copy of the news with fluorescent marker over the word crime in her trash can. Another started honking his horn every time he passed in front of the house. Small revenges, but accurate ones. The town hall sent an inspector. He arrived with a badge around his neck and a look like he wasn't kidding. He examined what was left of the fence, took photos, made notes, and asked if anyone had seen the work being done. A gentleman next door said that the employees said they were working for the HOA and that they were in a hurry because it was the president's order. That's it. They tied her name to the process. The first summons arrived 2 days later, a heavy official letter with a stamp from the Department of Culture and Heritage. In the HOA group, she tried one last card. "Good afternoon, neighbors. We are facing a delicate situation." The association only followed the guidelines approved at the meeting. There was no bad faith. "We're dealing with it legally." But the answer came quickly. "You ordered the demolition of a listed fence without consulting the owner or checking the history. That has another name." And then the silent war became open. Other residents began to question old decisions. Rules imposed by her that nobody remembered approving. Standardization of the facade. Restriction of external colors. Plants allowed in planters. Everything began to be revised. Her authority, which had previously been fueled by collective fear, was now dismantled with gusto. Every resident who had previously lowered their head now raised an eyebrow and asked, based on what? Meanwhile, the Preservation Department began the process of taking civil and criminal responsibility. The case, once confined to the neighborhood group, was now behind the scenes at City Hall. One counselor even shared the case on her personal profile with the caption, "This is the result of giving too much power to those who don't know what to do with it." The comments were unforgiving. The woman became a meme. There was a montage of her holding a hammer, and the caption, "Standardize, but with emotion." No one looked at her house the way they used to. That facade that she so prized for its symmetry was now a symbol of disrespect. The entrance, once impeccable, now seemed to carry an aura of shame. And the absence of the fence left everything exposed, literally and symbolically. Even so, she didn't apologize. She continued to hide behind the legality of the HOA, but it didn't stick anymore. Because it wasn't about the fence anymore. It was about abuse, about authoritarianism disguised as zeal, about the right to command without listening, and, above all, about what happens when you treat property like garbage and think no one will notice. But now everyone was watching, and what lay ahead was going to be bigger than any neighborhood association meeting. The weeks that followed were a slow and painful fall from a reputation built on ego and forced regulation. The woman who used to walk down the street as if she were parading on an exclusive high society catwalk of rules now avoided even opening the living room curtain. The world had become her mirror, and she hated the reflection. The hearings began, first with the Heritage Department, then with the Environmental and Urban Planning Prosecutor's Office, and what was supposed to be a simple facade standardization, as she said in her flyers, was now a formal accusation of destruction of listed property and violation of property. Her lawyers tried to claim ignorance, misinterpreted the HOA meeting, and even said that the fence didn't have a preserved appearance. But the prosecutor's response was striking. Historical heritage doesn't have to please the aesthetic tastes of the president of the association. It needs to be respected. In the neighborhood group, her silence was louder than any fight that had ever taken place there. No one answered the HOA's automated messages anymore. Newsletters stopped circulating. Unilateral decisions became a joke. One resident, who had always been discreet, wrote, "After what they did with the fence at number 23, I won't sign anything anymore without reading it 3 times. With a witness, trust is gone." And the empire of artificial flowers and standardized pruning that she had cultivated so diligently began to wither inside. She tried to rehearse a reaction. She sent out a new flyer with a sober design, different from the gaudy style of before. It was entitled, "Note of Clarification to the Community." It was a rehearsed text, full of words like misunderstanding, interpretation, and desire for harmony. At no point did it mention the word apology. It was more an attempt to clean up their own act than to acknowledge their mistake. The pamphlet ended up in the trash in most homes, literally. Some people tore it up in front of others. A more direct neighbor posted in the group, "If this note isn't accompanied by a formal request for reparations, it's just a fish wrap." Meanwhile, the case gained more visibility. A state television channel did a special report on the neglect of historical heritage in residential neighborhoods. They used my fence as an example. They showed before and after photos, interviews with experts, and even images from the City Hall archives showing the original registration of the coat of arms. The presenter ended the story with a phrase that went viral among residents. "A fence isn't just wood on the ground. Sometimes it's the line between respect and arrogance." With this phrase on social media, the woman went from local villain to a symbol of public irresponsibility. She was talked about in the bakery, in the market, at school. One of her children was overheard telling a classmate, "My mother knocked down a fence and now she wants to flee the city." And it was no exaggeration. One Monday morning, the gate to her house appeared with a "For Sale" sign. Discreet, but visible. The kind of announcement that speaks more than any formal text. It was confirmation of what was already known. She couldn't bear to stay there after that. Her name carried too much weight for someone who only knew how to function on the basis of control. The most ironic thing was when a realtor came to visit the house. He stopped the car, took pictures of the facade, and asked, "Is that the demolition company's house?" Yes. The neighborhood had already named it, not by name, but for what she had caused. The fence, meanwhile, had been rebuilt, with restored wood, some of the pieces recovered, and even a new coat of arms, made by a local artist who offered to restore what was left for free. When it was ready, there was even a small event, coffee, cake, and a visit from a counselor. The simple ceremony served as a collective message. The neighborhood doesn't forget, but it knows how to rebuild better than before. She watched it all from afar, through the window, alone. She didn't come down, she didn't wave, she didn't say a word. But her silence that day said everything she hadn't had the courage to say since the first nail was pulled out of the fence. The "For Sale" sign remained there for almost 2 months. No real movement, no visits from interested parties. It was as if the house had been infected with a specific type of bad omen that not even an experienced realtor could get around. On the outside, the lawn was mowed, the facade was clean, everything was millimetrically in place. Inside, nobody knew. The woman didn't come out. The car remained parked. The closed curtains became a fixed backdrop. The neighborhood, on the other hand, was flourishing. The reactivation of the fence stirred the collective. The neighborhood, which for years had lived under invented rules, relearned how to talk to each other. Residents started exchanging tools, organizing events without needing triple permission, and laughing at their own old rules. The fence became the new reference point. But not just because of the old wood. It was the living memory of a basta, a real boundary that was crossed and then rebuilt by those who understood the value of it. The city council continued with the process. The hearings dragged on, and the woman always appeared the same way, alone, looking like she hadn't slept properly, and wearing clothes that didn't match her past version. The woman with the heels, the red lipstick, the authoritative clipboard, was gone. In her place was a shrunken figure, still trying to justify the unjustifiable with phrases like good intention, technical mistake, desire for collective improvement. No one could swallow it anymore. Justice wasn't swift, but it was precise. The sentence came down on a dull Thursday. A clear order, complete restoration of the property with the HOA's own funds, and holding the HOA personally responsible for abuse of authority and disrespect for the historic preservation law. The fine was accompanied by a public warning. The story appeared on the city's official website, with an explanatory note and her full name in the footer. That's when she finally broke her silence. In the dead of a cold night, a removal truck was at the door. No notice, no message, no attempt to say goodbye, not even a honk. The few pieces of furniture were hastily packed into boxes. The house emptied, as if someone was running away from a guilt that had been there for a long time. The next day, the for sale sign was gone. A few days later, the property appeared on a judicial auction website, with no interior photos. The price was below the average for the region. A neighbor commented on the group, cheaper than a fence, and with a lot more history to hide. No one answered. The silence was now more respectful than debauched, because, deep down, the whole neighborhood knew that the story had gone too far. The street had to become a headline. The fence became rubble. The association became a joke, so that someone would learn that the world doesn't revolve around its own aesthetic ruler. The following month, a new family moved in, a young couple, with 2 young children and a dog who, on the first day, peed on the front lawn. There was no flyer, there were no regulations, no forced welcome with a list of rules, just ordinary people, living in a place that has relearned the value of living together without a remote control. One Sunday, the new resident came to ask about the fence. "I heard it's original, from a period. Is that really true?" I said yes. I showed him the old photos, told him about the restoration, the history, and what it meant. He listened with the look of someone who understands more with his eyes than with words. Then he laughed, leaning against the firm wood. "If it survived all this, it should hold up well until my boys grow up and start climbing here." We laughed, and that's when I realized the fence was now a living part of the neighborhood, not just as a piece of history, but as a warning, as a reminder of what happens when someone tries to dictate where they don't belong, to erase what they don't understand, to impose instead of dialoguing. The copy of the summons was still in the garage, not for revenge, but as a document, part of what happened, part of what shaped the new way of life there, part of what nobody wanted to repeat. The woman disappeared from the neighborhood, but her name continued to appear as a synonym for everything that shouldn't be done. When someone talked about changing the color of their neighbor's facade, there was always a joke. "You'll end up like Karen on the fence." It became an expression. It became a local legend. And perhaps, in the end, this is the most effective kind of justice, the kind that doesn't need a trophy or explicit revenge. Just a lesson well learned, echoing in every corner of the neighborhood, and a firm, protected, standing fence, enclosing much more than the land, surrounding the memory. And if you liked this video, don't forget to leave a comment and a like.